This week on the Nittany Dispatch, we discuss Penn State's upcoming college football playoff quarterfinal matchup with the Boise State Broncos. Hello and welcome to the Nittany Dispatch. I'm John Sauber, Penn State beat writer at the Center Daily Times. She's Audrey Snyder doing the same with The Athletic. And Audrey, we are in Arizona.
I'll say the backdrops have changed, John. We're not in our usual home offices or a press box.
There's a fan going.
I was going to say, I like what you did back there with the fan. Yeah, I've got a very nice outdoor setup that you cannot really see here, but I'll show you anyway. Yeah, we've made it to Phoenix or Scottsdale or Glendale, wherever. I'm fully
genuinely don't know. I really don't know. I don't know which city the game is in either, if I'm being totally honest. If you've noticed, I've avoided saying it. I know I landed in Phoenix.
I think it's Glendale, I think.
I so too, wrong. But I don't say that with certainty, so I don't want to just go spouting off about such things.
Phoenix, Tempe, Scottsdale, Glendale, somewhere we're here, and there's a lot of cacti here.
And to be clear, I could Google this, but at this point,
what's the point?
What's the point?
It's a holiday week for most, John. We're not Googling extra stuff this week.
Right. But we are here in Phoenix where Penn State is arriving later tonight. We are recording Saturday, I guess, afternoon. We are in the afternoon. It's evening in Eastern.
We got to figure that
time
out.
zone. Yeah. Penn State arriving later tonight. We'll have its media day tomorrow in preparation for the Fiesta Bowl on Tuesday, which
New Year's Eve.
Yeah, is New Year's Eve, and it feels weird playing on a Tuesday. That just feels strange. But Penn State they're the first quarterfinal matchup taking on Boise State, a team that last I checked, Penn State is favored by 10.5 points over. That being said, I don't know that this is your usual 10.5 point underdog because those 10.5 point underdogs usually don't have Ashton Jeanty. And I know that's factored into the spread and everything, but still a game breaker, the kind of guy that can completely flip a game on its head. I will let you choose where we start with this discussion to preview this game because there's a lot in play here, but I will give you the lead on this.
You know, John, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays week, happy close to New Year's week. To wherever our fine folks are listening or watching on YouTube. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe.
Yes.
Wherever we're coming to you from today, I hope you're enjoying this holiday break a little bit. I was back home, which was nice to be back in Downingtown for a little bit and got out here again Saturday, like John said. It's been a full day getting out here. And one of the things that I mentioned this before on our show that I am genuinely curious, and I've enjoyed talking to fans about this, is how do fans try to gear up for this playoff run, right? Like, I spoke to some people last week at a bar in State College, and they were like, hey, we're coming to the home playoff game because, like, first one ever, we got to do it. Spoke to some folks today on my flight that said, you know what? We were planning on coming out to Arizona for vacation between Christmas and New Year's. Just so happens that Penn State's out here, so we're going to do it. I have heard probably from the most amount of people that have said, you know what, like Miami, that's it. Orange Bowl, that's the one. That's where we're going. And at that point, we're going all in and national title game. Like we will do whatever we have to do to get there. So it's been really interesting. Like I've enjoyed interacting with the fans that I've seen kind of along the way of this playoff run, especially just trying to figure out, how you all do it because this is all new and it's exciting. I will say, John, because I flew out of Philadelphia on Saturday morning, a lot of Penn State apparel on my flight.
Yes, same here at State College.
Like, I think, and I know like this was one of the concerns with the playoff was how many fans were you going to get to travel to these quarterfinal sites? Because are they going to save for the semis, national title game? Are they going to go all in on campus? Like what's the deal? And I think this is where it helps Penn State, the fact that you've got this massive alumni base, right? Where like you're going to get people, I think, from the West Coast that are going to come to this game and whatnot. So that's been really cool. Like, I think, again, it's a holiday week. It's a weird week for us. We talked to players. We talked to James Franklin on Monday. We talked to players and assistant coaches or players and coordinators rather on Thursday, Friday. So it's just a weird week, but Sunday, as John mentioned, that's our big day out here. That's media day. As far as I know, I think it's just about the full roster and coordinators and that whole deal. So we will both be churning out a lot of content. John over at the Center Daily Times, myself at The Athletic off of that. And we're here for the duration of the playoff run, whatever that looks like. We're here along for the ride.
Yes, and I do think that you bring that up. It's a good jumping off point, right? Like what the fan representation will look like. because I'm with you. Most of the people that I've talked to are like, okay, Miami and Atlanta, right? Like those are the two. But I saw a lot of people in State College Airport, a lot of people at Dulles when I was flying out here this morning. So I wouldn't be surprised if Penn State is well represented. They tend to be at these types of things, right? They were at the Big Ten title game out of nowhere, right? A game that people didn't expect them to be in until 7 days before it. So I would expect it to be maybe like calling it a Penn State heavy crowd would probably unfair because Boise State's pretty close, and they have a lot of history at the Fiesta Bowl. But I do think Penn State will be well represented, and I think they will need it, right? Like this is the kind of game that can go back and forth. The way Boise State wins is probably going to be pretty frustrating for Penn State fans if things are going well, right? Ashton Jeanty's impossible to tackle. You can just go look up his highlights on YouTube. Like they're terrifying for defensive players. I think the most impressive thing, a lot of people bring this up too, is the contact balance, right? How many times he gets hit, just bounces off guys and, takes a sidestep to regain himself and then keeps running. He's awful to bring down. Tom Allen mentioned it this week. Players have mentioned it this week. And that's kind of the focal point for Penn State, right? Like if they can get him on the ground, they have, an even better shot than I think we both anticipate heading into this.
And I think, John, this is where, all these games throughout the year, you and I, and even last season, it's like, okay, well, Penn State has to do X, Y, and Z to win this game. Or if they do this, I really think in this one, it is as simple as stop Ashton Jeanty, knowing that you're not going to fully stop him, but you got to kind of limit the damage. He's going to get his. He's going to make big plays. He's going to make people look ridiculous because he's done that all year. But you just have to find a way to kind of mitigate the damage with him. And it's so crazy. And I think you mentioned Tom Allen talking about him this week. And I asked Tom, I said, has there been any? Because again, Tom Allen's a guy who's been in college football forever. Just about, well, definitely as long as you've been alive, John, probably like pushing up against.
No, he was in high school football for a long time.
Well, yeah, high school football, but still, when you got to college, I'm trying to age you back a little bit here, John. I'm doing
Tom was a late riser in the industry, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, he was a late
high school in South Florida, I believe.
South Florida. There's a little bit of Indiana in there, of course, with the Indiana high schools.
He was. I believe, and people who follow me are going to be upset that I don't know this off the top of my head because I covered Indiana high schools for a little bit. But I think he was the head coach at Ben Davis in Indianapolis.
He was because I looked this up on Friday, and Ben Davis was the high school that popped out. And I mentioned all of this as to say, Tom said that Ashton Jeanty reminds him of Derrick Henry. And when Tom was at Ole Miss, which I had forgotten that he was at Ole Miss, he was a linebacker coach there. That's like mid-20, like 2012, 2015-ish era, which of course is when Derrick Henry and Alabama are like just bludgeoning everyone. And I tried to go back and pinpoint it, and I believe, John, and I couldn't get my dates to line up fully correctly with this, but I think Ole Miss might have been the one team that like actually did a nice job against Derrick Henry. If the dates are syncing up, and again, nice job against Derrick Henry still means he went for like over 100, but didn't because they beat them, I believe, if my years are syncing up correctly. And so I think, like, again, you're dealing with a special talent in Ashton Jeanty, a guy that if you're not a Penn State fan, you're just a college football fan, you're tuning in for this game New Year's Eve, I think you're going to look at it and say, wow, this is great. We get to watch one of the best players in the sport. If you're a Penn State fan, it's going to be super frustrating. Go ahead.
I was going to say 2014, which would have been the year of overlap for the two of them. Derrick Henry went 17 for 37 in a loss to Ole Miss. So
I thought it was more than that. Okay.
Also played in 2013 against him, but Henry was not a feature back then. He had 2 carries for 18 yards and a win for Alabama. But yeah,
that was the Ole Miss win then in
2014. Yes, Ole Miss actually won in 2015 as well. But Henry, this was not against Tom Allen. Went 23 for 127 and a touchdown with 5 catches for 39 yards. That is probably the year you were thinking of. But Allen at that point had left to become the defensive coordinator at South Florida. But yeah, like, I mean, either way, like he has experience against that type of back, right? And the one thing I'll push back on is I don't know if it's as simple as that, because if they just let Ashton Jeanty run roughshod over them, I still think they might win, right? Like as long as your offense is scoring with Boise State, And then they're in a position where they have to throw the ball eventually, right? Where they have to, although they can get chunk plays with Ashton Jeanty, it's not like they can only create explosives through the air.
I don't think they can't keep up in a shootout.
That's what That's what I'm saying. Like, I think if they can stop Maddox Madsen and Cam Camper, who Tom Allen's also familiar with.
Great names, by the way. Great names.
Cam Camper out of junior college, committed to Indiana and played under Tom Allen, got hurt there. Allen talked about him a lot on Friday too, and how much he loves him and his family, like, and how essentially proud of him he was, and coming back from injury and everything. But honestly, if Boise State gets it going with those two, with Madsen and Camper, in particular, that's when I think Penn State loses, right? I think Jeanty could legitimately run for 200 yards and Boise State still loses this game. I think it becomes a problem when he is setting them up so well that the passing game is firing on all cylinders. As long as Penn State limits the passing game, I think they're probably going to be in good shape either way.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And the fact that I guess maybe the other piece to this that I don't want to say that we're not talking about enough, because we've asked a lot about it this week, and I just don't know how you kind of quantify it. But for Penn State, this is game number 15 in this season.
Yes.
And Boise State's coming off an idle week, and Ashton Jeanty is as fresh as you're going to be this year in late December, right? Like, I think I'm curious, John, do you think, does that matter? Does that freshness matter? The fact that Penn State, we're recording this, they played a game a week ago. They also had the Big Ten title game. Does that matter in terms of, Boise State had a week to, I don't want to say sit around because they're practicing and all these things, but just a week of recovery at this point in the year?
Does it matter in the sense that Boise State is healthier and will look better? Yes. Does it matter in the outcome of the game? I don't think so. I don't think the rest is going to be enough of a difference maker. I think this is the worst defense in the playoff that Boise State has too, right? Like, that's something that we have to consider. You mentioned a shootout. Like, there's a chance that Penn State scores on every possession. I'm not predicting it, but I think it's absolutely possible, right? Like, this is a worse defense than they've played most of the season, right? Most Big Ten defenses that Penn State has faced are better than this Boise State defense. At least according to ESPN, Bill Connolly's SB Plus, which I cite all the time.
I was going to say, I feel like we need to start paying Bill some money for all these citations that we're giving.
Yes. Listen, Bill does great work. Absolutely read everything he does over at ESPN.com. He's fantastic. But no, I think this is the worst team in the playoff. This feels like the kind of thing that gets clipped and then put on Twitter after Penn State loses to Boise State, if I'm being honest. But I think Boise State's probably the worst team in the playoff. I like, not to say they don't deserve to be there. To be clear, they deserve to be in the playoff. I want to get out ahead of that before that conversation even starts. I just think they're probably overmatched on both sides of the ball, right? Penn State has the better offense and it has the better defense. Well, then what's the problem, right? Like, where does Penn State lose this game? It's if the best player on the field wins it somehow. If he goes off for 300 yards, right? Like, if he has the kind of game that, he was incredible.
Can I stop you there for a second, John?
Yeah, what's up?
If the best player on the field goes off for 300 yards, like most times, 95% of the time, if we say that,
hyperbolic, right?
Yes, it's hyperbolic. But then when you look at a guy who's averaging 192, almost 193 yards per game, you're like, well, it could happen. Anyhow.
Right. And he's gone for over 250 twice this year's last two games. He went for over 200. Against Oregon, he went for 25 for 192, and they still lost. And that's kind of what I'm talking about, right? Like, they couldn't do enough at the end because the passing game wasn't good enough at the end against Oregon to kind of get the job done and to create enough. Madsen in that game was 17 of 40 with one touchdown. Like, I mean, it's fine, but it's not the type of game that is going to be enough to beat a team of that level. He has to be better than that against Penn State for them to have a chance to win. And that's with Jeanty playing really well. I tend to think Penn State would do better defensively than Oregon did against Ashton Jeanty. I think when we look at this at the end, he's like, we'll talk about, our predictions later. Usually when we do our predictions, I just I write my game preview every week, and my score is my score from my story, which is it will be the case this week. And my MVP is from the story is who I say we're talking about. Like, that's not going to work because spoiler alert, I picked Penn State to win, but I also still have Ashton Jeanty as the MVP. Like, I just think either way that he's probably going to get close to 200 yards. Like, and that's just like he's going, or at least 150. Right. And it's really hard to win that way though. Right. Like, it's really hard to lean on someone.
It's different to be built that way. Yes.
And to do it against a team that you are really outmatched against. For as awesome as Ashton Jeanty is, the disparity between him and like Nick Singleton is smaller than the disparity between Penn State starters at most other positions and Boise State starters, right? Like,
Right.
and that's why I'm saying that Jeanty is like a generational running back. Like, I would argue the best running back since Barry Sanders. I would argue that he's had a better year than Melvin Gordon did 10 years ago, but I think you're probably splitting hairs there. That being said, Nick Singleton's an elite running back too, and there's a substantial gap there, but because Singleton's also elite, like, it's less so than it is at quarterback, at tight end, at like as good as like the one spot that Boise probably has an advantage at is their number one receiver, with Camper being, better than probably anyone at Penn State at this point. But defensively, like every single spot, Boise has two excellent defensive ends, had combined for I think 19 sacks or 18.5 sacks this year. I would take Dani Dennis-Sutton and Abdul Carter over both of them, right? Like there's just a big gap across the board elsewhere. Let's take a brief break from the podcast to discuss our good friends over at Rhoback. As you can tell from the logo on my hat and on Audrey's hoodie, we are big fans of Rhoback here at the Nittany Dispatch. And if you'd like 20% off your first order, you can use code TND20. That's TND20s and the Nittany Dispatch to get 20% off your first order over at Rhoback.com for gear that I wear all the time. Performance hoodies, performance joggers, performance shorts. The shorts, I actually have packed 4 pairs of them for Arizona. Packed 5 performance hoodies. That is not a joke to be here in Arizona. It is all I wear. In this hat.
How many performance hoodies do you go through in a day, John?
Just the one, but I wear a hoodie every day. It's
interesting.
Listen, have you ever seen me not wearing a hoodie on this podcast? Be honest.
No, you're right.
You ever seen me not wearing a hoodie in general? Right. So yeah, all the time. Got to have a hoodie a day. And if you would like a hoodie a day as well, you can get them over at Rhoback.com, with code TND20 for 20% off your first order.
Future Fans is a new brand that helps little kids become big sports fans through storybook-led activity boxes that help them understand football. Get ready for Penn State's long playoff run and make sure your kids are ready to experience the magic with you. Our friends at Future Fans have their box designed at $49.99, and you can check it out over at futurefans.com. You can get a discount with the code DISPATCH over at futurefans.com. Save 15% with code DISPATCH. John, if you've ever tried to explain this beautiful, wonderful, wacky sport that you and I love and make a living off of with football, it is not the easiest sport to try and explain to a child. But Future Fans is here to help kids ages 4 to 8 understand and better explain the sport. It helps lessen the frustration from parents and family members and will help your loved ones gear up for the playoff run. Check out our friends over at futurefans.com. No, for sure. And I think you mentioned the Oregon game earlier. And again, the thing that kept Boise State in that game late, there were the takeaways, right? Like this is a team that was able, and this is where it goes back to, for me, if Penn State plays their game, and again, I'm not saying Penn State needs to be perfect because they're not. That's unrealistic for any team. But if you can minimize the takeaways, right? If you can play a clean game, I think they win pretty handily. And it goes back to your point, John, of like the talent disparity in the trenches on both sides of the ball. Across the board. Like, this is when we pointed to, and we did that show when we were both sleep deprived in Indianapolis, and said,
yes,
hey, here's the playoff path. This is what we were talking about, right? This was hey, you get SMU at home, you get Boise State. This is your most favorable path, the most favorable path in the playoff field. Well, here it is. Now's your time to capitalize on it. Now's your time to cash in. And I think Penn State is really in a good spot to do that. I mean, I think talking to players this week, especially when we talked with the defense on Friday, a lot of these guys, the sense I got was that they're very excited to get a shot to play against Ashton Jeanty. I mean, Devon J. Thomas said, hey, if you're a competitor, like, you absolutely relish the opportunity to play against the best running back in the sport right now, right? Like, this is, I think, a really kind of cool moment for these guys. But yeah, I think Penn State, if they come out, if they play their game, if the moment isn't too big, and I haven't seen anything from this team to suggest that they're going to be enamored by the playoff, semifinal moment, or you're on the road in a neutral site. Like, I don't get that vibe at all. I think they're fine. And I don't even think and I know, talking to Penn State fans, there's the concern of literally, John, I have not seen a single prediction this week that has picked Boise State, which is bizarre a little bit when you kind of look at the playoff field and you say, oh, this is a team coming off a bye. You'd think there'd at least be a couple people, and I'm sure there are maybe in the Boise sphere that are kind of picking them. But
I was going to say Sean Goodwin, who does great work over at the Idaho Statesman, We wrote a story together, actually, co-bylined it about, kind of the most important players in this game, and he took Boise State in the upset. And like, I think I don't want that to get lost, that this is absolutely a game that Penn State can lose. Like, this is not this is a walkover. They're playing Purdue or something. Like, this Boise State team is very good. It's just, if both teams are playing their best, Penn State wins, right? If both teams play their most average game, Penn State wins. If Penn State plays above average and Boise State plays its best, Penn State probably wins that too, right? Like, Penn State has to beat itself, I think, in this one. And that's going to come down to Drew Allar and what he does as a passer. It's going to come down to what they do when it comes to decision making. They've talked a lot recently about being aggressive, right? And how that's going to be part of the identity of this team. That's got to be the case, right? Like, you cannot get to 4th and 1 at midfield and punt, right? Like, this is the game. You got to go and you got to push the pedal to the floor, and you have to back that up. Otherwise, you can say that stuff all you want, but if you get to the big moment and you turtle up, then it's not going to matter.
And then we're going to be here talking about this on Tuesday, Wednesday evening, whatever it's going to be.
That'll be a Tuesday night.
The January 1st, we're going to be here talking about that because, you're right. That has become a theme this postseason run. And this is something that, goes back to really late in the game at Minnesota with those 3 4th down conversions. And we saw it last week with SMU where Penn State was at their own 19 or their own 22 and they're going for it. And we're like, what in the world are you doing? Like, what's happening here? And it's this whole, like, we want to be aggressive. This is our mindset. But you're right, John. Like, you can't just say that. Like, you need to actually continue to demonstrate that if that's how you're truly approaching this playoff push and this postseason, which I think it's interesting. Kind of the other side of this, I just want to touch on this very briefly because we had our own quarterback specific episode here a couple week and a half ago, whatever it was. But we do know now that Beau Pribula is headed to Missouri. That's come out since the last time we recorded. So we have the destination there. I'm not sure, again, I don't know the full setup on Sunday, but if we get a chance to talk with quarterback 2, Ethan Grunkemeyer, I can guarantee you John and I will both take that chance if we have that tomorrow. Because again, like, we're just looking at, okay, yes, you have this playoff run and it's super exciting and this is the whole season. This is what you live for, but you're still in the roster development mode here. And like, all these other puzzle pieces really fit together. And one of the things, go ahead.
I was going to say Penn State's made additions too, right? Like, they had Devontae Ross, they had Anai White.
Yes.
I think there's the only 2 that joined. Yeah. Because Kyron Hudson
last recorded
doing it. So yeah, I think, Penn State is in this roster management phase. This is, it's a very weird time and it's easy to get distracted. I think they've done a good job of balancing it, but they're building toward next year too.
And they have new players on the roster, right? Like, Tom Allen was talking to us on Friday and he said, like, we're out at practice and LeVar Arrington Jr. is here. Braz Thomas is here. Darius Dixon enrolled. And like, these are guys that are allowed to practice in this playoff run. Now, obviously, like, they're not going to play. Like, this is not going to be some crazy scenario, right? Like, there's no savior wide receiver coming in at this point. Right. I reassure you of that. But these are valuable reps when we talk about 2025 and beyond and just getting these guys in the fold. But again, this is all new and it's different. And it's part of this whole weird, unique postseason, which again, you and I have talked, like, it's exciting, it's fun, but there are just kind of so many more pieces to kind of keep track of. If we're like, in terms of housekeeping, it's like, okay, where's this guy? Where's that guy? What about this guy? Zakee Wheatley committed that he's going to come back next year, next season, because next year starts in a couple weeks. So that's happened since we've recorded. So it's been a lot of like housekeeping things, this week, this month, but these are all things that matter in a playoff run. And how Penn State is positioned to kind of sell itself to recruits, not just like we're talking 2026 and beyond. That all matters, right? When you are the only semifinal game on New Year's Eve, you're going to get more eyeballs, right? If you go out there, just like against SMU, when you're the only game in that time slot, you go out there and wax your opponents, that's going to matter. That matters a lot to impressionable recruits who are watching you. And again, not to get too ahead of ourselves here, but Penn State is inching closer to territory that has not happened in our lifetimes, right? And of course, I'm alluding to a national championship and the fact that, I'm 35, but it hasn't happened in my lifetime. And, these are things when you talk about bringing this super strong Penn State brand to like this next generation and keeping this program kind of supercharged moving forward. this is what we're talking about. Like, these are the moments that you have to capitalize on. And it's easy to say, well, yeah, it's Boise State, Penn State should win and all these things. Like, if you capitalize on the moments, right? How many times have we heard James Franklin say we need to be bold and aggressive, and not just, at this point of the year, but all points of the year? Like, these are those little moments that can kind of propel you forward in all aspects of your program.
Yeah, and like that aggression, like you said, has to take place on the field too. And I'm not just talking about the decision making either, right? Like they have to go play to win. They have to go try and bring Ashton Jeanty down. They can't like let him come to them, so to speak, right? Like they've
all 11 guys on the field is going to take the tackle, right? We heard that one a lot this week.
Yeah, they've got to take it to Boise State though, and I think that applies offensively too, right? Like you mentioned, like not turning the ball over. I also think they need to maybe not take chances, but like push the ball down the field, right? Like be aggressive with your play calling. Andy Kotelnicki needs
chuck it deep a bit, John. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm just saying like stress the defense out, right? Like do things to call plays, like trick plays and everything that you have, or whatever you want to refer to them as. I just think this is the time to be aggressive, to try to set the tone that, like, listen, sure, Penn State had the quote unquote like easy path to the semifinals, but like they're getting there in style, right? Like I think they want to send a message, and they should try to send a message. They should be trying to win this game by 3 touchdowns, right? Like dispel any notion that it's, sure, Penn State's in the semifinals, but yeah, they beat a SMU, but like, they barely beat Boise, whatever. Like go take the game and go set the tone that this team's a real contender, because I think they are. Clearly Jaylen Reed does as well. He mentioned something about the national championship, but like having the chance to play for, or to win a national championship, and the fact they're practicing on Christmas. And then he immediately just casually said, which we will, which is, I think, a whole lot of confidence. And I think it's a lot of warranted confidence. So this defense is confident. I think the offense needs to continue to show that it's confident, right? Like you want Allar making decisions that are aggressive and trying to win the game. I'm not saying throw picks, to be clear, but like I think he needs to kind of play a little differently, I guess, than he did against SMU, where he was a little bit hesitant. And I think if there's one qualm I had with the offense, it was that Allar was a little bit not defensive. He was a little bit hesitant in that game against SMU, especially early in the game. He ended up settling down, but as long as they can avoid that, like this, not to say this game's in the bag or anything, but I do think Penn State's primed to win this and move on to the Orange Bowl.
Yeah, that to me is like the scary piece in all of this is, we've kind of said all year, if Penn State gets to the playoff, like we believe there's going to be this Drew Allar moment, this Drew Allar game where he kind of takes it over and wins. Obviously, that was not the case against SMU. That was a very forgettable game from Drew Allar. Maybe this is that game, right? Maybe it's still kind of yet to come. I'm not sure. But I do think you're right that the moments where he looks tentative or looks a little risk averse, right? Like that kind of, to me, was taking us back a little bit to last year. You just got to let this guy play, because the arm talent's there. The skills are there. He trusts his playmakers, right? I mean, I've never covered a quarterback who has been so adamant and so defensive of his receiving core. I mean, maybe to a fault, right? Where he's like, hey, like these are my guys, and like I love my receiving core and all these things. He believes in his guys, and you know what? Like at this point in the year, what Tyler Warren's going to do. Andy Kotelnicki's going to come up with something to feature and highlight Warren and his skill set. So you just got to get a little bit more from the guys around him. And again, like Penn State has the talent there, right? Whether it's the running backs, again, catching more passes to kind of offset some of that receiving core. Maybe we see that. Again, Nick Singleton, I still think like the way that both of these backs have played this last month and a half, like there's a lot to like there when you kind of try to project this team and the rest of the playoff field. The other part of this, and obviously we hit on the defense a lot earlier, but Penn State has the best run defense remaining in the playoff field. Like that to me is the other piece of this where you say, you know what, like you start to look at the teams that are getting picked off here and all these things. And you're like, yeah, like there's a lot going in Penn State's favor. Again, you've got the favorable path. You're on the favorable side of the bracket. It's just a matter of kind of coming out here and taking care of business. And everything that we've kind of seen and heard has looked like Penn State. And again, for as cheesy as I say this, I'm totally distracted by a bird that's flying into my window. Everything that we say about the 1-0 mentality and how it can seem cheesy and overdone and all these things, like it's clearly proven that it works, and it works for this program, and it works for 18 to 24-year-olds or however they are at this point. And this to me is like another example of that. Like, I can guarantee you, as John and I are maybe potentially, possibly, yes, definitely trying to map out flights to the Orange Bowl, I guarantee you nobody in Penn State's headquarters is doing that. That is just, it's a tone set from the top from James Franklin on down, and they just don't deviate from that. And I think it's a good testament to how strong the leadership is, but also like they are going to be locked in on Tuesday night, New Year's Eve. Like they're not going to be looking ahead. Even if you and I are, because that's part of the job, and part of it is kind of projecting where Penn State is at in this field. But yeah, I think are we at the point, John? Are we ready for predictions?
I think so. You want me to go first on this one?
If you want to, sure.
I think it's going to be a relatively high-scoring game. I do think, like I said, Jeanty's going to get his. I have Penn State winning 38-28, which is a very slight cover for Boise State. I don't feel great about that. I do think there's blowout potential here. I do think there's room for Boise State to win this game. But at the end of the day, I just don't think they can keep pace with Penn State's offense. I think Penn State's defense can do just enough and come away with the victory. And I know it sounds weird to say they're doing just enough in a 10-point win, but I think that's a testament to how good Jeanty is and how close he can make this. As far as who we're talking about on Sunday, I think it's Tyler Warren. I think it's another one of those games for him, right? Like 8 catches, 110 yards, and a touchdown.
Another one of those.
Yeah, with some other stuff mixed in, him lining up at different positions. Maybe he lines up at middle linebacker for a little bit. I don't know. That's a joke, to be clear. Not going to happen.
Clip that. We never,
as far as I know, anyways. Yeah. Yeah, I think Penn State, it's not going to look as easy as it did against SMU, but I think Penn State wins this game and advances to face Mount St. Notre Dame in the semifinal.
The ultimate helmet clash. Here they come. Yeah, I've got Penn State 31, Boise State 20. Again, I mentioned this with SMU. Penn State is in this really good spot right now, right? Where we're seeing them play well in every facet. I still would not rule out some crazy special teams play from Penn State. Like I think at some point this year, like, and I'm talking beyond the fake punt. Like I think we're going to see Singleton or someone is going to rip off a kick return at some point this year. Like I just keep waiting on that every week. Maybe I'm just waiting in vain. I don't know. But I do believe that the player that I think we're going to be talking about on Sunday is definitely a more under the radar pick. But I'm going to go with middle linebacker Kobe King, because I think if Penn State's going to keep Ashton Jeanty in check, it's going to come down to King, who really has done a great job this year. Definitely gets lost kind of, I think, a little bit in the under the radar discussion, just because, you know, it's easy. It's natural for us to focus on the Abdul Carters and the Dani Dennis-Suttons of the world. There we go. But I think Kobe King is one of those guys, when you look at just how much he's progressed from last year to this year, I think it's been huge. It's been huge for this defense. I mean, Dom DeLuca got his against SMU. I think we're going to see Kobe King kind of under the radar, get these guys in the right positions to make plays and keep Ashton Jeanty in check. So I got Penn State 31, Boise State 20. And John, I am with you. I think we're cruising for the helmet clash in Miami, in the Orange Bowl, Penn State, Notre Dame. Man, that would be a heck of a lot of fun. Be a lot of fun for us to cover, but
yes,
we still got to get through these next few days first.
Yes, and that is crucial. And if you want to read everything we write over these next few days, you can find everything Audrey does over at The Athletic. You can find my writing at centerdaily.com. I think this is as good of a place as there is to leave it. We both have Penn State winning. By the way, Penn State up now to 11.5-point favorites, which I think is interesting. It's moving that direction. We'll see if it shifts at all before Tuesday. But if you want to follow us on social media, you can find Audrey on Twitter at OddSnyder4. You can find her on Blue Sky if you search Audrey Snyder. You can find me on Blue Sky if you search John Saubert. You can find me on Twitter at John Saubert. As I mentioned, where you can find our writing already, it's The Athletic and centerdaily.com. Don't forget to leave those 5-star ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts. That really helps us out. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that thumbs up button and the subscribe button down below. We are very close to 1,500 subscribers, which means I can then continue to bring up the march to 2,000 subscribers that we continue to be on as well. But we will be back post-game at some point discussing whatever happens in this game and whatever comes next. But until then, thank you for tuning in. Have a great day.